4. Rodin rested his empty mug on the table and sat back, satisfied. Jimmy shuffled around, serving a couple of new customers, both mercenaries from Diffloren's district. Rodin recognized them, couldn't remember their names. Harmless in here, of course. The last person to become aggressive in Jimny's cafe had found half a dozen blades pointed his way, while Jimny himself called for calm, asked why everyone couldn't just get along and enjoy their food and drinks. This was one of the very few places Rodin felt comfortable, and he considered catching Jimny's eye for a top-up, but he'd been here too long anyway. The bell jangled as the door opened. Rodin looked up, assessed. Female. Street tough. Confident. She caught Jimny's eye, must have given him some signal, because he stepped back and let her approach Rodin's table. He tensed, especially when she took the chair opposite. I know you. She shook her head.
I'm just an intermediary.
He'd heard similar before, from influential characters who wanted to stay out of public view. Self-important fools, most of them. This about a contract?
Could be. Word is you never got paid for your last job.
Sore point.
Understandable. You're not the only one, though. Vatic wasn't the fastest at paying what he owed. Always on the lookout for a technicality, something to justify withholding payment.
She tilted her head.
Doubt he could complain in your case. Perfectly executed removal, right?
Rodin watched her. Hard to judge her age. He'd have guessed late 20s when she first sat, but the lines around her eyes and the eyes themselves spoke of more experience. Worked hard on her appearance, though. He doubted it was through vanity.
Hard to get a client to pay up once they're dead,
she continued.
Especially when the client's finances were in such a mess. Looked like his daughter wasn't the only one screwing him over, right?
Rodin waited a couple of heartbeats, then said, "There's a point to this." Her smile was cold.
The one I represent has an offer for you. He has a job, one that's more delicate than most. Requires more than a simple killer.
And he thinks he'll get me cheap because I must be struggling for funds, right? She laughed, a surprisingly pleasant sound.
My boss isn't like that. When he's hiring, he not only looks for the best but also someone he can trust.
That piqued Rodin's interest. Don't hear that word too often. This boss of yours got a name?
One you're familiar with. Care to guess?
Rodin almost told her to get lost, that he wasn't into games. But there was something intriguing about her, the way she presented herself, the way she held her boss in high regard.
I'll give you a clue,
she said.
You've worked for him in the past. Tough jobs but well rewarded. He told me I could mention the dancer.
As if Rodin could forget that contract. Boranov, he said. She nodded.
And whether you take his contract or not, he'd like to pay you what you're owed for the Vatic job.
She sat back, watching him. No, seeing if he could work out why Boranov, definitely not some self-important fool, would want to pay a rival's debts. And with all Rodin had heard on the street, all the connections he'd made, it became clear. He profits from Vatic's death, doesn't he? She raised her eyebrows, urging Rodin to continue. He did. Vatic was pushing hard, right? Making too many deals, must have been cutting into Boranov's sphere. He narrowed his eyes. Thought Boranov was persuasive. Surprised he didn't have words or something.
Have words? Oh, his dealings are far more involved than that. And yes, he's been in communication with Vatic. Unfortunately, some people don't listen to reason.
And then they require other means of persuasion, Rodin said, recollections taking on new meaning. Vatic said I'd come highly recommended seemed to suggest the source was someone important. The woman shrugged.
You have an impressive reputation.
And she smiled, let him know that his logic was right.
And another contract for my boss would only improve that. Would mean you could demand higher fees too, but it would also give you the opportunity to take more interesting jobs. Ones that require the mind as much as the body.
Before he could respond, she pushed herself away from the table.
Can't talk details now, but if you're interested in hearing more, I'll be back here tomorrow, same time.
She stood, one fluid movement that spoke of decent muscle control.
Until then?
Rodin watched her leave, the bell jangling as the door closed, and he thought. It wouldn't surprise him if Boranov had already figured Vatic's daughter was skimming funds, and he would have known how others would react if it appeared that Vatic had his own flesh and blood removed. Some people wouldn't be bothered by him killing family, but letting someone close get away with so much would show unacceptable weakness. Nothing happened in isolation. Only a fool failed to consider consequences of an action, but it took a special kind of mind to see where those consequences would lead and plan accordingly. It took a cold logic to plot the points and ensure things fell just right. A mind like that would know how to entice someone to take a job for them. Of course, Rodin would take Boronov's contract. The extra funds would be a bonus, but already Rodin anticipated something challenging, a job that would push him, that would force him to improve his game. He sat back and signaled to Jimny for another drink. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this short dive into the world of Dominions. If you want more, the first novel, Dark Glass Dominions 1, is a good place to start. But if you want something special, I have 2 free exclusive novellas. The only way to get these stories is through my mailing list. For more information, visit twian.com.